Glenn Skuta from the Watershed Division, Director of the Watershed Division, who is going to be telling us about the prestigious Governor's Award for Better Government that EAO and Watershed Division was awarded by the Governor for their work in monitoring and, water monitoring and watershed work. And he's going to get into that a little bit and how that helps us, put us in a position to carry out our work for water quality monitoring and improvements. Helps us inform that process as we go forward. Just as a reminder to people who are joining us via WebEx, please mute your lines so you don't get into embarrassing situations there. And if you have questions, send them online to us, and we'll be sure to offer them up to Glenn. Glenn?
All right. Well, good. Well, good morning, everybody. Glenn Skuta, Watershed Division Director. Doing this talk, I'm a little like, oh man, I'm just looking around the room, and like there's people in this room who know this better than me, and then there's people in the room I'm pretty sure have very little knowledge of what we're talking about here, so it's kind of one of those audiences with a broad range of background. So I'm going to try to give enough background so people aren't lost, but not too much detail so people aren't bored. See if we strike that balance pretty well. But yeah, so this is, billed as being about the award, which I've got up on the screen right now, and it is, but also just to give people a sense of the type of work that we do in what we call the watershed approach, primarily in the Watershed Division and the Environmental Outcomes Division. So about the award itself, they are annual awards that are given by the governor, as it's called for better government, and there are 3 different categories that they give the awards out in each year for better government, and one is called the Great Results category, and that's the category that we fell into. I'm trying to remember what the other 2 categories are right now. One has to do with communications, I can't remember the other, but total, and basically agencies self-nominate. So we put in our nomination for this work that we do in the watershed approach, and we were one of 60 applicants total and then the governor's office, I think it works primarily through MMB. It's the people that kind of staff that along with governor's office input and go through the nominations. Of the 60 applicants, we were one of only 14 finalists. And in that great results category, 8 of the 14 finalists were in that great results category. And then we were the one of the 8 selected to actually receive the Great Results category award. So that felt great. It felt good just to be selected as a finalist, because the 60 applicants, we culled that down to less than a quarter of those, and then to be the one of the 8 selected was quite good. And really, this award is it's a piece of paper, but it represents really well over a decade of work and the work of dozens of staff in our 2 divisions, and so that we touch have involvement from other divisions in the MPCA. Our partner agencies are very involved in this work, particularly I would say DNR provides a lot of the scientific work that we incorporate into this as well. They're a partner in monitoring, but we also have involvement in this with Department of Health. That's getting stronger with groundwater and drinking water information that they're bringing into our processes. Department of Agriculture does parts of the monitoring, particularly related to pesticides. And then for Water and Soil Resources, we primarily feed them this information that they use in their work with the local water planning and implementation activities. So it's a big cooperative effort represented over a long period of time, represented by this piece of paper that this award is. It's also a representation of a lot of continuous improvement work. This watershed approach that I will get into more detail on what am I talking about in a bit here, but it's a big, complicated system. Lots of players, lots of science, lots of social science that goes into this, from monitoring our waters and all the data analysis, and then taking that information, that data, and turning it into information that helps inform local water planning. And it's one of those things that's it's never done in terms of designing it and figuring out how to do it and how to do it better. We are, as you know, a continuous improvement agency, and this work is no different. Since really kind of launching into this type of work in about 2008, we've had at least 11 discrete continuous improvement projects dealing with slices and parts of this overall approach and system related to assessments of our water body condition, the impaired waters listing process, monitoring the design of how we do watershed restoration protection strategies, how we do stressor identification work, where we have stressed biology in our streams and figuring out what's causing impairments in those areas. So lots of continuous improvement that has been going on throughout this decade of work and continues to go on today. Our staff and our leaders, we all get sometimes a little bit overwhelmed or feel fatigued by the fact that we're constantly evolving how we do this work to do it better and more efficiently, also to be in a better cooperative atmosphere and nature with our partners, and it truly is continuous, never quite ends. But that's it's kind of the nature of the beast, kind of the nature of our world. So, with that background on the awards, I'll really talk about, what is this work that got this award? So really, two of the most basic requirements of all states from the federal EPA under the Clean Water Act for their water programs are to measure the health of our lakes and our rivers, and then to develop cleanup strategies for polluted waters or impaired waters that are known as total maximum daily loads, TMDLs. We on purpose never used the phrase or the acronym TMDLs in this application, because it's one of those things that means a lot to some people, but to reviewers that would be looking at our application who don't know our world at all, that would be one of those weird acronyms and phrases. But I'll tell you, TMDL, total maximum daily load, stands for doing a study to calculate, in any equation to calculate, what is the total maximum amount of a pollutant or load of a pollutant that a water body can receive on a daily basis and not trip over water quality standards. Total maximum daily load of a pollutant that a water body can receive, still not be polluted. So that's TMDL, what we call in this application, a cleanup strategy. So those are kind of the two key things we're focusing on here: monitoring and then doing these cleanup strategies or TMDLs. And this was, I try not to think about this too much because compare Minnesota to, say, Nevada or Arizona in terms of how much water we have. But the responsibility we have as a state to do this kind of work for like almost 12,000 lakes, almost 100,000 miles of streams, right? We're just, those are drier states compared to our very west state. Or think about a state the size of like Delaware or something. And they probably also have smaller programs, smaller numbers of people, but still, Minnesota's just huge geographically, so much water, so much diversity in our landscape that it is really quite a challenge to do this work, to do all that monitoring work, assess all that data, and develop all these cleanup strategies, basically. Let's see here. This is a really jumpy mouse. We try to do this work, we need to do this work, we want to do this work as best we can with a lot of partners. Obviously, we can't and shouldn't do it all. It's down to actually implementing these strategies so that we can clean up waters that are impaired or keep waters that are clean. Most of that gets done at the local level, either by landowners themselves or by regulated entities like cities for their stormwater and wastewater and that type of thing. So that has a lot of complexity issues too. We can't just be scientists out in the field, scientists at our desks, and do this in isolation. We do a lot of this work cooperatively to bring people along, get their input and involvement, and ultimately generate buy-in so that they will want to take the action that is necessary for protection and restoration of our waters. For our water monitoring activities, you think about how this has changed over time. And a lot of what we've been able to succeed on here is due to the Clean Water Legacy Act that was passed in 2006, which is really the policy statute that put this type of work into law. It's not just required that we do this by the Federal Clean Water Act, but it's required that we do this work by the State Clean Water Legacy Act as well. And then, very importantly, the passage of the 2008 constitutional amendment that the voters very convincingly said, yep, raise my taxes. Not a lot, but raise, our sales tax 3/8 of a cent to fund clean water work as well as parks and trails, the arts, and conservation lands. But a third of the money that is collected through that constitutional amendment, Clean Water Land and Legacy Amendment, comes to clean water activities. But you think about before that, what was our monitoring system like? Well, it was meager, and we were doing the best we could, but we did not have a lot of resources back then to do a great job of monitoring waters of our state. We were doing what we could. One of the things the main systems we had was called the Minnesota Milestones Program. But it was only about 85 sites statewide. Those sites were on mostly larger rivers. They were monitored like 3 out of every 5 years only. They were grab samples for what is the concentration of pollutants. Some of those sites were close enough to the USGS or DNR gauge where we could kind of correlate the pollutant concentration with the flows and calculate loads, but that was the exception to the rule of that system. So it was a really not a very robust system. The thing that was good about it was in some sites we had ultimately gotten 40, 50 years of data, and so you could use that information to kind of tell what was changing over time. We saw Jake Christopherson, in here today, did a really nice report once we sunsetted that program in favor of being able to do more robust monitoring with these funds. And we were able to generate a great report that one of the things it really did was highlighted the issue of fluoride. Fluoride levels have been continuing to go up over time, as well as MPCA nitrate levels continuing to go up over time, whereas with other pollutants like phosphorus and sediment, we've seen things either in decline in pollutant levels or at least flattening out and not increasing. So a pretty sparse kind of a monitoring system that we had there. We also had a lake assessment program, which we were doing a fair number of the lakes of the state, the more recreational ones, the larger ones, but again, a pretty small number overall. We had been developing a biological monitoring program from, around the mid-1990s, and that was going well, but it was again just severely underfunded. We were on a very slow pace to make progress. So that's kind of where we were on monitoring, where we were on developing the TMDLs, those cleanup plans. I'll show you some data on that, but we were really struggling with the rest of the country. The end of the 1990s, early 2000s to get these cleanup plans done. They're complicated endeavors. No one was quite sure how to do them at that time. We were doing our best again, to get these done, but we were also limited on funding, and we were doing really just a few of those a year back in the early 2000s. And so, we were, reached my predecessor and others would say, well, we're on like the 100-year plan here to get these things done, which was not satisfactory to everybody. So again, the amendment has given us a chance to really ramp this up, not only just by the sheer amount of money and staffing that we have, but enable us to really change the whole system to what we call, generally the watershed approach. And this simple diagram kind of, it's the 10-year cycle, the concept of a plan, do, check type cycle, where, you begin with your monitoring and assessment, the blue box on the right, gather your information, assess the quality of the waters, of comparing what you found in your monitoring to water quality standards, what's impaired, what's not, what needs to be restored, what needs to be protected. Further characterizing based on that data, gathering some additional data, doing that stressor identification work that I talked about earlier to characterize what is going on in the watersheds in more detail, what's causing problems, what the sources of the impairments are, and developing what we call watershed restoration and protection strategies, the green box, which includes those cleanup plans, those TMDLs, but also goes beyond restoration into protection. And then all of that then feeds into comprehensive watershed management plans at the local level. And that's another thing that local water planning requirements have been in place in state law since the late 1980s. But if you go back, and I remember in the mid-90s, looking back at some of those first, even second generation local water plans, county water plans, watershed district plans, they were very vague general plans. And again, no slam on the folks that did those, but they had very little information to work off of. They did the best they could. Those that had more of their own resources, particularly like watershed districts and have taxing authority and such, they could do somewhat stronger plans to have better information to work off of. But most counties, did very general plans because they had very general knowledge of what was going on in their watersheds. So now, based with the work that we're doing, those local water plans are getting continuously stronger, and there's a whole broader approach on the watershed basis that Board of Water and Soil Resources, partners at Bowser with the locals are advancing and doing called One Watershed plan that moves that planning basis off of a county political boundary to the actual watershed boundary, how the water flows, which is a great change. And that all then should drive the implementation, because ultimately, though we have a lot more money than we did through the amendment funds, Clean Water Fund, it's still not nearly enough money to fix everything or solve every problem. So the mantra has become all this work needs to be prioritized, targeted, and measurable. Limit amount of money to use, make sure that you're working on the highest priorities, targeting the use of that money to where it's going to do the best good, and then measure your results. So we can delist the waters that are listed as impaired or polluted, and show other signs of success. So, as I kind of mentioned along the way there, just to be more explicit about it, is we have, over this last 10 years, really moved much of what we do in water management in the state to a watershed approach. Not so much political boundaries, not so much programmatic, but really doing our water work, our programmatic work and such, more on a watershed basis. We still have, obviously, statewide programs for stormwater and wastewater and things like that. And there are actions that we do that are statewide in nature or based on what that program does, but so much of that still is done now in the watershed context. which is a way to manage water. Okay. So, let's get into a little bit more detail on those. So what does this kind of look like? So this is the Root River watershed, for example, in our southeast Minnesota, maybe like on the Root River Trail or down in that area for other reasons. It's about a 1 million acre watershed. So in Minnesota, we have 80 watersheds, and they really vary in size. It's one of the larger ones. There are a number that are about this size, though it's not completely anomalous. We do run into that political boundary issue, though, where you have the border of the state. So particularly along the Iowa border on the southern part of the state, we have a lot of very small watersheds in Minnesota. They're large watersheds, but we have just pieces of these watersheds that are largely in Iowa, for example. Not only down there, but along the edges of the state, sometimes we still run into that issue where we don't have jurisdiction beyond our state border, even though the watershed continues on. But, so anyway, largely, we have 80 watersheds in the state that vary in size. And what we're doing in terms of monitoring, and again, this is led out of our environmental outcomes division, is we've greatly expanded our monitoring reach. Generally speaking, with the systems we had prior to the amendment money, we were averaging about 160 sites being sampled or monitored a year. And now it's more like 900 sites a year that we're able to monitor. And I would say, too, that sort of the quality of that monitoring is also a lot better, stronger than it was, in terms of a lot more of it being tied to the flow of the river, as well as some of it being just concentration based. So in the first 10-year cycle of monitoring, getting around the whole state in 10 years, about 8 watersheds a year for monitoring. In that 10 years, we were able to sample over 6,500 sites for biology. So that's about 3,500 sites where fish were monitored, and over 3,000 sites where bugs and other macroinvertebrates were monitored. So the way to look at that is it's about 4 times more than the total number of sites that were sampled in the history of the monitoring program at the MPCA before this. So just a huge explosion in the amount of monitoring we're able to conduct and the amount of data that we're able to get and understand our waters much better. I mentioned partnerships. We've had a volunteer monitoring program for years. Started as the Citizen Lake monitoring program. Decades ago, Citizen Stream monitoring program was put in place after that. It's been running now for, I think, a couple of decades. We currently have over 1,400 citizens that volunteer to monitor water quality on over 1,000 lakes and 500 streams in the state. So that is great supplemental data as well. We do pass through a lot of money to local governments to assist with collecting water quality data. In 10 years, we've done 184 contracts with 88 different local partners, totaling over $9 million for monitoring activities. So again, that's just bred a lot of good partnership, goodwill, so to speak. It's more people involved and engaged in the work, and helps down the road when it comes time to act on the data that's collected in implementation. So really we do this monitoring, we're trying to characterize the condition of the water and the biology in the watershed with kind of an unbiased design that kind of covers much of the watershed, following the hydrology, the sub-watersheds within these major watersheds. So ultimately it allows us to kind of hone in on sub-watersheds with pollution problems and target our implementation, as I talked about earlier. I really hats off to the staff and the leaders in EAO that were able to do this. You draw this stuff up on the chalkboard, so to speak, and make your plans, and there's a lot of variables in all this, including weather, which can really screw up your monitoring plan. I know there's watersheds this year that are dealing with, the intense rains that happened up in Iamora and the Snake River, for example, and down in Redwood, the intense rains they've had. And the system was set up with enough flexibility in it that the watersheds that EAO does in a given summer are typically kind of geographically scattered around the state, so if one area is too wet or too dry, they can go work in areas that are in a better condition for monitoring and then come back to those watersheds later. That was a concept that was built into this from the beginning, and it was a good idea, and it definitely has helped from time to time. But it's also a lot, I used to be in that group for a while too as a manager. I know a lot of it is the staff themselves being flexible and, sometimes putting in some really long hours when conditions are good for monitoring to actually make it happen. Hats off to EAO for actually getting the monitoring of the state done on the window, that 10-year window that was prescribed early on. Provided us just a phenomenal data set, and really EPA considers our program to be one of the best monitoring programs in the country. We're one of only 4 states that meet the criteria for being the highest level of EPA's criteria for biological monitoring programs, and kind of categorize programs at levels of proficiency or quality, and we are one of 4 states that meet the criteria for the highest level of quality for a biological monitoring program. So that's awesome. But beyond that, all the monitoring we do, EPA looks at us as really state of the art. So that's great. Let's see what else I want to say about this. Yeah. So that gives you a sense of the kind of work we're doing. The map, the red sites are biological monitoring sites in this watershed. There are actually 166 of them. Black triangles are stream chemistry sites, 15 in this watershed. And there's a blue flow monitoring site at the mouth. I believe there's at least a couple of sub-watershed monitoring sites in there that I can't quite see. But that's an intense level of monitoring. Again, we can't monitor every stream or every length of stream. It's just not possible. But this amount of coverage is fantastic. I used to have a map, and I could not find it, that shows how many dots we had on this map before the change to the system, and it's just a drop in the bucket compared to this. I wish I could find that back. So it's a bit on the monitoring. So kind of some looks at the results we get out of this. These maps are a little bit dated. We've got more coverage than this right now. These maps are about a year old. But so if you look at, aquatic life assessments, the map on the right is for streams on its that color scale from great ones being blue to green, and then medium in terms of the amount of impairments we're seeing in yellow, and as you start to get to orange and red, you're getting to watersheds that are pretty impaired overall from what our data shows. The map on the left is talking about continuous improvement and continuing to improve and evolve the system. There's not a lot of color on that map because this is for lake biology, and it's only been a few years that in operation with DNR, we developed a whole new system for actually doing biological monitoring on lakes for the fish and the plants to be able to rate, assess the quality of the lakes. Previously, we were only doing water clarity and chemistry, primarily phosphorus, for lake health, which is great. But now being able to actually assess the biology of the lakes, with a lot of heavy lifting on that from DNR, that's a great improvement to the overall system. These maps are for lake and streams aquatic recreation. So lake one on the left shows you where we have a lot more coverage for lakes based on, again, chemistry and clarity. One on the right, when we assess recreation for streams, we're basically on bacteria levels, and so that's kind of coverage so far. So, like I said, these maps are a little dated. We've got a current map right now that would show a little bit more color in more of those watersheds, and about a year from now, as we're wrapping up the assessment of the final watersheds, all these maps will be mostly colored in, where we were able to assess our quality condition. So that's kind of the monitoring component. So all that data again goes into comes to the watershed division, and we do additional work to ultimately our goal is to provide the science to our local partners for them to be able to understand the state of and the problems in their watersheds, to set the table for local water planning decisions. So, map on top is just kind of one graphic from the Thief River RAPS and TMDL documents that are either on public notice right now or just about putting on public notice, I think. Just an indication of part of the watershed where we see higher sediment and suspended solids chutes. A picture there of, again, working with folks. A lot of times it's meeting them where they're at, both literally and figuratively. And sometimes it's the Legion or the bar or whatever it is. They have those public participation meetings and meetings with our local partners. Talked a little bit about this, but to just detail a little bit more. So the TMDLs, total maximum daily load reports for impaired water, has been required by the Federal Clean Water Act, now also required by the Clean Water Legacy Act at the state level. Not only do that calculation to figure out what is that total maximum daily load, but to then call for pollutant load reductions for those impaired waters. So we're exceeding the amount of pollutant that water body can handle, set load reductions to bring that back, which means where we have regulated sources, that translates often into tighter permit limits for wastewater treatment plants and also for stormwater situations. And then where we don't have regulatory authority, for example, in row crop agriculture, very small cities, stormwater that's unregulated, we still call for those reductions, but we cannot compel them through permits or regulation. So the authority we have to do these cleanup plans or studies, MDLs, doesn't give us additional new regulatory authorities. It just enables us to use existing authorities better in terms of setting better or tighter permit limits. But then we're just really calling for reductions where we don't have the authority to compel it. RAPS, Watershed Restoration and Protection Strategies, that's what that stands for. Not required federally, but it is required in state law, the Clean Water Legacy Act. Incorporates the TMDLs, so the TMDLs are just part and parcel within the RAPS. But then also the P, protection, the acronym RAPS is an expansion where we do want to make sure we're doing what we can to keep waters that are not impaired from becoming impaired. Also, prevention is worth at least a common cure. There's a lot of work that's involved in putting RAPS and the TMDL together. So we take, again, all the data that was gathered by DAO, the assessments that they've done where they've crunched that data to determine, how the waters are compared to water quality standards. But, really the DAO's job is characterizing the watersheds as best they can. And again, it's way better than we've ever been able to in the past, but they can only go so far with that. We end up then to get the data we need to do actual TMDLs and such. We often have to do some follow-up monitoring to kind of fill in the gap between what was good enough and used for assessments and what we need to actually do TMDLs. So some amount of field work to gather data and information. Can be some additional chemistry monitoring, for example. Also that stressor identification work where we're figuring out what is stressing the fish and the bugs in the watershed. We made a huge investment in developing watershed computer models. We, again, as a state, probably have the most complete set of watershed-based computer models in any state in the country. It's a model called HSPF. It's a Fortran F, and HSPF is for Fortran. It's a Fortran-based computer model that's been around for a long time. It's very powerful. Does a great job of modeling based on the data you have for your watershed, modeling what's currently going on in the parts of the watershed where you don't have as much data based on the data you do have. Also, you can run scenarios of if you were to change land use, land activity, permit limits, whatever in a watershed, what will that do? What would that do for the water quality? We've also been building an app in a way called SAM, Scenario Application Manager. That enables people who aren't hardcore modelers to take those watershed models and run scenarios on their own and to be a hardcore modeler. And so for local decision makers, local vendors, they can run some scenarios of like, well, okay, if we could convince a quarter of the producers in this watershed to install cover crops in their current cropping system, what would that do to water quality? This would be an example of something we would like to be able, they would like to be able to model. Or if we ratchet down the permit limit on the wastewater treatment plant, what will that do to downstream water quality? So, you know, it's a planning tool for them to be able to figure out, you know, where are we now? How do we get to where we want to go? Ultimately, we do those KMDL calculations and develop that, and then do the strategy development. That gets into a little bit into the KMDL, but largely in the RAPS reports that have some RAPS strategies. We call for what are the typical strategies that would be implemented to be able to, again, reach the water quality goals. We don't want to be too prescriptive. We can't be too prescriptive on that. Those details really get worked out. We pass our work on to the locals and to Bowser so that they, in their water plans, get more specific on exactly who's going to do what where. But it should be grounded in this science. So just one example, back to the roots, when we did the RAPS and TMDL work in the Root River, which is one distillation of a lot of that information that I was talking about, spotlighting or highlighting portions of the watershed where we would advocate that this is where you could really kind of target your work, exactly what to do on exactly which field or whatever. But, you know, the pink areas are where we have bacteria problems, for example. We do bacteria type EMPs, whether it's fixed septic systems or manure management or whatever. Those are the watershed maybe to really start, because that's where we have kind of the biggest problems, or we found the worst or largest sources. So there's a lot more behind that would be actually in the report. It's kind of a simple depiction of, you know, you're looking at a 1 million acre watershed. If you're a watershed manager, you got to be overwhelmed with, well, where do we even start? Now, this is conceptualizing a little bit of, well, maybe this is where you start. Even within these areas, those are still huge areas. You have to kind of tunnel down, and that's what they do in their water planning activities. So in terms of progress we made, I talked about how, you know, the amount of monitoring has really ramped up from what would have been a few dots on the monitoring map to, you know, well over 100 dots on that monitoring map. As I mentioned earlier, when we first started doing TMDLs, we were figuring out like the rest of the country and trying to get our infrastructure, so to speak, up of doing our TMDL work. But, you know, in 2004, 2005, we were doing half a dozen a year. We started ramping up a bit, and we were, getting to the point where we were able to do between 100 and 200 a year for a couple of years there. But now, as you see, these last 2 years, we're really taking off. Many of these watersheds are well on their way or leaded their TMDL work, where we used to do TMDLs back in 2004, 2005, largely 1, 2, 3 at a time. There were a couple projects we did that were a little bit bigger, but they were more the exception than the rule. Now the rule is that we try to do as many of the TMDLs in the entire watershed as we can. So we have the information, we have the staffing, we have the time, everything. We try to get them all done if we can. And that's enabling us, to do many, many more at once. The efficiency is really taken off. So, by 2014, we basically were doing double the number of TMDLs annually. By 2017, we're at 7 times the pre-2014 level. Now, 2018, the last bar, obviously we're only halfway through the year, so that bar will go up. It's not going to be as big a jump as last year. Last year we had some really big projects that made that bar go up significantly. But still, we're on track for 2018 to be our second best year that we've ever had. And we're going to head to 2019. 2019 will be more than 2018. Again, approaching probably closer to that 2017 type level. So this is great too. Many of us, as well as a lot of our customers, so to speak, our partners, the legislature, back in the early 2000s, were just like, oh my gosh, we're never going to get anywhere close to getting all this work done. And now, we look at it and say, okay, we get 5 to 10 more years down the road here, we're going to have probably 90% of the TMDLs done. There's always going to be some that we can't quite get to because we don't have the data or other problems, but we're going to have the lion's share of this, of getting the studies done, getting the implementation to take hold and ultimately do list the waters. That's going to take longer, but at least we're getting our work done and setting the path forward at a much stronger pace. It used to be also that basically the cost of doing a single TMDL was, they varied because some of them were complicated than others, but anywhere from $40,000 to $150,000 per TMDL. The average cost was about $50,000 per TMDL. But in most cases now, because we're doing so many more at once, so much more efficiently, the cost is about $3,000. So much more efficiently. We have, just a second, Laura. So the map on the right is just where we've got the TMDLs with the bar graph. The map on the right, where we have watershed restoration protection strategies either done, dark blue or light blue, on or off public notice heading towards finalization. So we've hit the 50% mark now. 50% of the watershed of the state have RAPs either done or on public notice, and then we're on track to have all of them done in 5 years. Laura, go ahead.
Are TMDLs offer chemical pollutants, or talk about what they range and what they might?
Yeah, so TMDLs, Laura asked if TMDLs are just for chemical pollutants or what, and they are basically for chemical pollutants. You can't do TMDLs for things that are like dams or barriers in the water, maybe culverts and things that prevent passage. You can't do a TMDL on that because there's not a load of that. That's the problem. That's where, again, in RAPs, we can call for those types of things to be addressed. The scope of RAPs is beyond just TMDL. Where we have like biological impairments, what we try to do there is if there is a pollutant causing the biological impairment, that can be sediment, dirt, or it could be some other chemical, but we can do a TMDL on that pollutant that's causing the biological impairment. In many cases, biological impairments are not so pollutant-driven. They're driven by things like lack of connectivity or habitat alteration.
How about heat?
Heat, and actually we did just recently complete our first and only so far temperature TMDL, and so it was for Miller Creek in Duluth, and it's complicated. The equation ends up using joules, as the measure of heat, and converting that. Yeah, that was a complicated one, but we were able to do that. So ultimately, it calls for more shading of the stream, reduction of hot stormwater from Miller Hill Mall and other parts of the watershed, enhancement of cool groundwater flows if possible, and those types of activities. So that's kind of the work that we do in a nutshell. A lot to it. No, I feel like you're not quite doing it justice. I brought this map up earlier. So this is what we had gone to in the first 10-year cycle in terms of monitoring of well over 150 sites in the river watershed. Well, now that we've completed that 10-year cycle, we're coming back to these watersheds to re-monitor them and see what has changed from their condition, what is their current condition, as opposed to what it was 10 years ago. And one of the efforts we did to look at how should we monitor the second time. The first time was really getting that baseline of what is the water quality condition across that watershed, but there's always a desire, we always want to be as efficient as we can be regardless, but there is always a desire that the monies that we've gotten through the Clean Water Fund and all the money that we get, that as a system, we of course want to put as much money as we can into implementation to actually fix the problems and protect the waters. And so there's this tension always between we don't want to spend too much money on monitoring and planning because then that's less money that goes to implementation. But of course, you don't just want to scattershot the money on implementation and not have it guided by good data for monitoring and planning. So it's trying to find that balance. But the folks in the EAO kind of looked at, they did a continuous improvement project, I was involved with that at the time, and really looked at, okay, when we come back to these watersheds at the same time, do we really need to monitor everywhere that we did the first time, or what's the amount of monitoring we need to do that will be able to compare time one to time two? And they were able to determine that, we don't need to go back everywhere. There's a number of sites that you need to hit on a second time around to make sure you have enough data to compare, but it's not everything. Also, we heard from partners and customers that as good as this design was, by its nature, it wasn't everywhere, so there are pockets or parts of the watershed that the local partners want more information on. So they want to be able to ask for, could you do some additional monitoring in other parts of the watershed that you didn't get to the first time. So in the route, for example, from this 170-ish sites, that was called back to this number of sites, which I don't know exactly what that number is. I'm not going to count. I'm sorry? 51 sites, okay. So, that's a pretty significant cutback. But the yellow sites here we're kind of filling in those gaps. We're hearing from largely our local partners as well as maybe the other programs within MPCA of where could we use some additional monitoring where we didn't do it so much the first time. And again, making sure we have enough sites that are repeats from the first time around to be able to compare time one to time two. And this is evolving too as we test this out at a couple of watersheds like to figure out. Again, it's just designed it with the belief that this is going to be sufficient and yield sufficient information for us moving forward. But that's what we'll be keeping an eye on as we move forward. So, the RAPS and TMDL effort, like I said, we're basically kind of at that halfway point, but we are also right in the process right now of doing continuous improvement. Got about half a dozen teams right now working on pieces of the RAPS development process where we're looking at how should we be moving ahead once we revisit these watersheds on how we do stressor identification, how we do additional modeling. What should the RAPS update look like? Do we have to redo the entire RAPS? Probably not. Are there parts that do need enhancement or improvement? Probably. But largely, we're going to be moving to a process second time through where we really meet with our local partners and our Bowser partners to really kind of a watershed by watershed basis, make sure we're meeting the local partners where they're at in terms of their capabilities, where they're at in their local planning processes, what their needs are for information that we can provide to give them, again, sound science to base their planning and implementation activities on. And make sure the work we're doing is going to be real beneficial to them in that regard. So stay tuned on that. That's evolving and developing. So we have about 5 minutes left for questions. Hopefully that did it about right in terms of the level of detail and enough background and such. But any questions, and folks in the regions, you can type them in, or that might be best so people don't talk over each other. Otherwise, I think you can just unmute and ask.
So, Glenn, how do we anticipate and plan for new standards coming along in the next 10 to 15 years? And we know where there's some big ones out there. We have stressor ID, obviously, at the first start, but how is that as part of the RAP team process?
What are those ones that are coming? Tell me.
You already mentioned a couple of nice ones on
well, nitrogen might be one of them.
For sure, chlorides, sulfates, ions, etc. I mean, which are your favorite ones. So.
Yeah, I guess work we do, I guess, in this 10 years, we had some of that already happen, right?
Sure.
River eutrophication standards. So what we've done so far is, once a new standard goes into place, and once the AO starts actually monitoring for it, or already monitored, but now we can assess that data. Once we get that information, we build that right into the work that we do. It's so hard to predict because, I remember back in 1998 being told very clearly, we will have a nitrate standard by 2003. It's all based on EPA is going to have their science done and have and it just got slimed like here we are, literally 20 years later, we're still in that. So we can't plan too firmly on what it's going to be, but I think for us it's being flexible and adaptable. That when a new standard goes in, new data is gathered and assessed, new impairments are listed, we try to incorporate those into our RAPS and TMDL work. Because, in some cases, we now know how to do this stuff.
Right.
It's a new pollutant, but we know how to do a TMDL. Like, there's some weird, temperature rules that, if it's going to be chloride or nitrate, that's not too dissimilar from doing a TMDL for other chemical parameters. And I think we already know a lot about the EMPs and strategies that can address those things.
Follow-up question. So when something new comes along and you already have half the RAPs done, so then you will tackle the new standard in the next round?
Yeah, and that's part of the concept of it being a 10-year cycle is that when we finish the first 10 years, we're not just done. We will come back, and that's that conversation with the local partners on, what needs to continue to be done, or what's most helpful to you. But we also have requirements that we have to meet. We still have to do TMDLs for new listings or listings we were able to do last time. How do we involve them in that at a level that works for them? We don't want to overburden them with that, but we also don't want to exclude them from it. Some local partners really want to be very involved and can be, and that's great. Others are kind of like, we got enough to do. If you could just do that, that would be great, and we can work that way with us. But yeah, so as we come around the second time, it's picking up what we didn't get to, or picking up what's new, and adding that to what was already done.
Liz, do we have any comments or questions?
Just got one right now, Keegan. Curious if they're making inroads with other agencies to identify areas where changes have taken place on the landscape to aid in understanding where delisting potential is made occur. Well, I think, yeah, I mean, Ben, I think you know there's been some meetings in the North Fork Crow River that we're involved in where Dana Vanderbosch had set up a couple weeks ago. From what I understand, it went pretty well. I think there was some concern at first that, you know, is MPCA going to be in a role of kind of being the judge, you know, and are they doing well or not? The Bowser folks, the local folks, and it's really not about us judging good or bad. It's really about comparing time one, time two, comparing where we've had implementation to where we've not. It's a complicated question because, you know, effectiveness monitoring has been a bugaboo for a long time of how do we do that at a scale that's not going to break the bank. We can't do effectiveness monitoring on every field or even, you know, every small sub-watershed. We have to do it at a scale that's affordable, but also is going to enable us to delist waters once they've been cleaned up. The other thing with that is just the lag time. I mean, the water's going to get polluted overnight. They're not typically getting restored overnight. And you know, even 10 years of activity in many areas isn't going to be quite enough necessarily to reverse the course of you know, of impairment in some watersheds. So I think we are making some inroads with the other agencies, but there's still work to do. Laura, you had a question?
Yeah, in terms of structure data that you're collecting, is anything being collected that connects the changes in the climate in a particular watershed to what the characteristics you see in the stream or lake itself?
In terms of trying to tease out a climate signal, one of the main things I'd say we did is, it's probably about 5 years ago now, we created a system within our biological monitoring network where we're typically, you know, we're in a watershed for 2 years. Most of the biological monitoring is done in 1 year, and then we're not back for 10 more. If you consider all those sites that we do over the course of 10 years as a network, we've selected a couple hundred sites, I think, within that to be a long-term monitoring network, and they are monitored more frequently. And they're more kind of least impacted type sites. And one of the goals of having that sort of sub-network that's more frequently monitored is to be able to, over time, potentially tease out a climate signal. So that's probably the main thing I would say. But Kim may have other ideas.
You got it.
I think we're over time, so I don't want to keep people too long, but thank you for coming. We can hang around a few minutes if people have questions.
Yeah. Okay. You got later on.